All right, good evening. It is Wednesday, I almost said Tuesday, Wednesday, September 1st. This is the Town of Groton Long-Term Recovery Committee. Members present, Granatowski, myself, Mr. Burt, Councilors Aubry, Bordelon, and Baumgardner, Ms. Harkin and Mr. Bronk from Planning and Development Services, Human Services Director Fondulis, and State Senator Summers is with us. So thank you everybody for being with us. We have somebody else here. Oh, Moderator Evans here, great. And Moderator Evan from the RTM is with us as well. All right, very good. So we have a quorum. Let's see, approval of minutes, 2021-622, August 4th, 2021 special meeting minutes. And Mr. Byrd, I understand we have a correction.
That is correct. Mr. Bronk was reported as is on there as being present. He was not.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the minutes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the August 4th, 2021 meeting minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any
And
abstentions?
I apologize. I missed the first and the second. Could you give me the first and second on that?
Make a motion.
Thank you. All right, so,
I will be abstaining.
okay, let me backtrack here. So did I move that or did I not move it?
I thought you had. Okay, then I'll be a second.
Okay, so moved by Granatowski, seconded by Hedrick. All those in favor of approval of the minutes of August 4th, please say aye.
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 Representative Conley has joined us.
Thank you. I was just, I'm gonna let you take over attendees. I'm just gonna do the meeting thing here. So opposed? Any abstentions? So Mr.
Yes.
Blanc is abstaining. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 voting, 7 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstention. All right, great, thank you. Representative Connolly, we just approved the minutes and we are just starting item number 4, which is new business. Thank you for joining us. So we are on to new business 2021-2084 ARPA funding allocation and distribution process. There isn't a motion right now, I don't believe. So Mr. Byrd, I'm going to turn it over to you because you sent some information out to everybody unless you want to turn it over to your team.
I'll go ahead and turn over to Tabitha and Paige.
Thank you.
I believe Tabitha is going to present.
Sure. So I guess we'll start with the
Flow chart and the discussion on the 2-phase process.
right. So that should be in your packets. It's a colorful flow chart. So this outlines what we're talking about. This 2-step process is the needs assessment, which begins with where we are already today, having these open house discussions with various citizen groups, and then having a launch of the Bang the Table platform, which is it's a cloud-based software where it integrates social media, surveys, videos, very collaborative type of public participation to gather people's information. So we're hoping to launch that very soon. We're working on a contract for that. And then advertising in local media. So having the typical ways to reach out to folks, having some ads in the newspaper, and, seniors and folks are like that are usually more accustomed to getting information that way. So we really want to cover all our bases there. So that's phase 1.
May I interrupt, please? Are you on page 16 or 15 for those in the packet? But you said the colored chart, funds
I
needed.
believe it's page 15.
Okay, great. Thank you. So for those of you who are following along, it's on page 15. Okay. Counselor Bordelon, do you have a procedural question? Because-
Yeah, I was wondering if it's possible to screen share, just since it's a recorded meeting, it'd be nice to have it up if we could. Thank you.
Oh. I think I can, yeah, if that's okay with Mayor.
Let me make you a co-host 1 second. There, you should be able to share now.
Okay, let me just. Oops.
Great. Thank you.
Is that
Thank you for
better?
that. Much nicer. Thank you.
Okay. So this is, so that was the blue phase that I was just talking about, the first phase, the needs assessment, phase 1. Then the phase 2 is to take everything that we hear, which we're already doing. We had, I think I distributed to the group a listing of everything we've heard so far, and then prioritize, categorize that into what we're calling the buckets, and then take those buckets and prioritize them according to a criteria. So if we can create some kind of not complicated criteria of things we want to see, like, you know, projects that benefit the public, for example, versus just one private citizen. That's just an example. So then from there, we would finalize the funding strategy and allocate the funding to buckets. So take those buckets and say, okay, how much are we hearing that the need is for this? And then we should maybe put about 40% towards that need. And then take that to town council to have a public discussion, put that on our Bang the Table platform for public feedback, and just have community feedback on the overall funding strategy and the buckets. And then from there, we would have the opening of grant applications. So that's what the application that was included in your packets tonight refers to. So that would be a public release of a subrecipient grant application, and then folks can ask for money through that grant application, and then a team that would be chosen somehow and selected through certain criteria again would review and rank those applications that we've received. And then hopefully from there, we would see town council's final approval and allocation of the ARPA funding. And then once they've approved the funding, we could give those grant awards out, and those subrecipient awards would get out on the street. You know, we were kind of thinking that, you know, just for preliminarily thinking that projects where you're giving funds directly to someone, like rent assistance, for example, it would likely be filtered through a larger organization, and they would be the subgrant recipient. And then if it's a town department, we may not call them a sub-recipient. They're really part of us. So it's just a little bit of you know, figuring out as we work through this in an iterative way. So that's a lot of information at you, and I guess we can talk about it at this point. I'd really love to hear feedback. So
as far as like a town department, because there's already people that are floating ideas for spending the money, right? And if it's a town department, that would be overseeing a project, right? How does that fit with budget? And I don't know, maybe that's a Director Landry question. So if say, for example, somebody wanted to do a project that would normally be a CIP for the town, but they wanted to use ARPA funding, how do we process that, just as an overview? Would the town department that would oversee the CIP have to go through this process that you've outlined? How does that fit with normal budget then? So I'll throw that out to start us off.
I'll just answer what I know out of it, and then maybe John can jump in, or Paige. And I would say that the application, we'd want the town departments to fill that out so that we have an outline. And I can, when I walk through the application, you'll see what kind of information we're looking for, so that we can track these things a little better. But the way the financing is worked, that's not my ballpark.
I'll weigh in on that as well. We definitely anticipate most, if not all, requests complete an application. And that would include town department. If we go back to the final rule from the Treasury, we need to make sure that all of these requests are in line with the federal guidance. We also need to make sure that they are neatly fitting into our buckets, our priorities. And then lastly, that they're going to work with whatever monetary allocation we provide for each bucket. So the best way to do that is through an application process, and that would include departments as well.
And this is John, and as I've given this some thought, after you get through that process and funds are awarded, you would have to be put in the CIP list. So once the funding's there, you can do a mid-budget. It doesn't have to be through the budget process, but it would have to go through the, approved by the council, approved by the RTM to be on that CIP list. And I imagine we're gonna have probably several of those.
Okay, so the town department that would normally be the overseer of said CIP would apply through this process that Planning and Development Services is working on right now. It would be approved through this process, and then it would also then be placed to go through a normal town funding approval. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, through a mid-budget funding approval, likely, depending on the timing.
Okay, thank you. And I see moderator Eben has her hand up. Is it in regard to this? Go ahead, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the flow chart is missing the RTM as a step in the process because under the charter, we have to approve any appropriation of $10,000 or more. And so we would be kind of engaged in this as well.
Yeah. Now, some of that will be covered when the RTM approves there'll be a plan. The RTM will approve the acceptance of the grant and plan. But then on top of that, if there's CIPs and certain things that have to be put in a particular, be put in the CIP plan, that'll also likely come to the RTM.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that it would be less rubber stamping by the RTM and that we could engage in this substantively. I mean, you're spending money on some kind of software to tap into what the town of Groton wants. Well, I have 41 town members who are seated on the RTM and are probably among your most engaged town members. So to not allow them an opportunity to weigh in on this, I think would be a mistake.
So would the green step, if you will, town council approval and allocation, referral and resolution through town council process, would that, I assume that was referencing normal charter processes, and it would go then through whatever we do, and then if it's over 10, then it's going to go to RTM. So that's where I saw it in there, but I understand if we need to make reference to that. I think that would be appropriate to add it. I think that would be the step where it would be. That's where normal budget normal appropriations would come in the process as well. So. Okay, so that was my first question on this. Does anybody else have anything to ask at this point, or do you have more, Ms. Harkin? I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
Am I muted? Oh,
Hear
you can
you.
hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I got a couple different screens here. So I had the application as well. So did we want to go through that now, Mayor? Or did you want to talk more about this?
I think we should probably kind of come to a consensus whether this is a good flow chart first, and then we can go to the application second, if that's all right, Mr. Burt, you good with that?
Yeah, with the addition of the RTM. And I do see Councilor Bordelon's hand is up.
Yes. So we'll go ahead through and we'll just say, yes, this is good, or we'll tweak just like we're going to do with adding the RTM and the green layer there, and then we can go on to the applications. Okay. All right. So Councilor Bordelon.
Yes, thank you. So my question, is each grant process going to flow this way, or is there going to be an open time period and a closing time period? Like how, in a little bit more detail, how would these applications flow? So that's my first question.
I'd envisioned opening and closing because there's the two tranches, and then we'd have, maybe perhaps two calls for grants, and anyone else who has been part of the process can chime in.
And you really have to have a closed time so that you could compare one to the other. You can't keep accepting over time without reopening a certain set process. So it would be, we want all the applications to review at once.
So we would be looking at the purple step then is the step where the grants would open, they would be received, and then within that step as well, they would close out one layer of this.
Okay,
Correct.
so my question is also, I think maybe as we progress forward, it'd be great to start looking at what those dates are going to start to look like. So it's great to have this colored grid and it gives us a focal point, but I think we kind of looked at a grid the last meeting, and I think to move the thing, you know, to move it down the road so we all can see it visually, it's great to start talking and seeing what timeframes and dates are we thinking that open application process is going to be, ballpark, and we can refine it as we get closer down to the purple. But I think it's important because of messaging and getting that information out in a timely manner. We should start targeting how we're going to start to move that, and the time frame starts and close on that. So do we have that at all yet?
We kind of need to figure out what we want to do for outreach, set some timelines on that, because it, you know, if we only do one thing a month, it'll be, you know, it's going to be, in my mind, it's going to be much dictated by that input process. What do you think, Tabitha and Paige? It'd be a pretty wild guess at this point. We could put something together, but I think we'd have to give that.
I think the input, the public input is the largest limiting factor. Depends on how long that is going to be open, how many meetings we're going to have. And when we get a pretty good sense, basically that's the needs assessment, as was stipulated in the flow chart. Once we have a pretty good sense on what we believe these buckets are going to be, then I believe we'll have a better sense on when we can actually come up with a time frame to release the application.
I guess what I'm saying here is I think this is a great starting point, but I think to get funding in the hardest hit areas that we need right away, we need to start targeting how. And so like the needs assessment phase 1, what do you think? When are you thinking of finalizing the strategy? When are you planning to preliminary town council, like moving towards that? Because then you can start to visualize the opening of the grant application. Right now, we don't really have a targeted process on that. And my concern is, as we don't have dates, even public, or an idea or a ballpark on any of these phases yet, we start to lose time and ground to get appropriate funding where it needs to go. So we should at least have dates for the first 3 starts of this. I do think the public discussion and all of that, but we should really start to look at the fine details in those areas. That's what I'm asking. So when will we have that information is my question.
So I'm gonna jump in here and say the point of us talking about it tonight is to say, yes, we like this. And once we say, yes, we like this, then staff can say, okay, they like it. We're going to do this on this date, this on this date, this on this date. So the way I'm understanding this is we have to tell them, yes, this is good. And then they can start putting in the time parameters.
I think that's a great plan. I just hope that those time parameters are going to come. I think we should be part of that discussion, because I do not want to see an extension of time and lapse and funds sitting and not being allocated. So is that going to be at the next meeting, do you think, dates, or where are we at with that?
Let's see if we like this approach first. Okay, let's figure out if this is what's good. So is there any objection to the flow chart as it stands? And then we could work on dates. So like if people think that we should not be doing the preliminary town council discussion at all, if we should skip the town council, or, you know, whatever, I'm just being facetious at this point. But if there's a step we're going to skip, or if you think something should be in a different order, that's the first discussion we need to have. And then once we have that discussion, then they will say, okay, we can do it in this number of days, this number of weeks, and then we can proceed with the other things. So Mr. Burt, do you have any further comment on that, or is that how you saw the process moving forward, or do you have a different idea?
I agree with you.
Mr. Bronker, Ms. Harkin, any comment on that, or will that work if we decide if we like this first and then?
I think that's an appropriate tack. The other thought I had, obviously I was not in the last meeting, but I do recall previously, this committee talked about immediate needs, and can we do like an immediate need type bucket? And that is certainly possible if we knew that there was something we had to deal with right now. I think that is possible, but focus was to apply some rational planning to this so we can make sure that we're going to invest these funds the best way we can, because we're gonna receive more than in requests, we're gonna receive more than what we have in hand. So there needs to be some system to actually evaluate how we're gonna get the best bang for the buck.
Okay, and I think we already have taken one action for the health district where we allocated money for the health district. Okay, we'll go back.
And the COG, just to mention it.
I'm sorry?
And we will be doing the COG next week.
Okay. All right, so we'll go back to moderator Evan, if you have a comment on the flow chart.
Thank you, I did. And I was going to say that really the process has already started, because I know we just acted on the Ledgelight Health, and it sounds like perhaps planning department has already bought software with that money. So some of that is perhaps happening. But what I wanted to just see in this flow chart besides the RTM is perhaps just so you know, this is kind of like what I do for my day job, which is run grant, administer grants. And so what you really need to do also at some point, and maybe it's subsumed under some of your tasks, but it's not explicit, and it really needs to be explicit, is to develop review criteria so that when you're in that, the blue, which is where you open these grant applications, you should really have some sense of who's going to review those. And you need to really be wary of conflict of interest that may be inherent in that review panel composition. And then you also need to have, a process, and I'm happy to help work on this if you want, but there need to be, tangible criteria that people are going to review the applications on with a metric. And a process for, grading them, and then another process for collating the review panel into one score so you can rank these relative to each other. Again, it's just, these are actual steps that need to be fleshed out. And so I don't see those criteria, but those are super important in this.
Mr. Burt and Ms. Harkin both have their hands up to respond, I assume.
Two things. One, no ARPA dollars are being spent on software that's being purchased internally. And we're working with the city to jointly share that software. But on top of that, we have been talking just internally about those more detailed things, starting that process. This is really a very broad overview. Really, all we want to do is get the public input started, because that's going to take a long time. And the longer, if we wait another month, it's going to be yet another month to wait. But yes, totally 100% agree. Yeah, totally on board. So.
And Ms. Harkin, did you want to respond?
I just wanted to say to Councilor Moderator Evan that I totally agree as well. And if she has any suggestions that she wants to email me, I'd really appreciate working with her on the criteria development. So.
You're hired, Moderator Evan. All right, Councilor Bordelon.
Thank you. I can agree with Moderator Evan on her assessments. I also can appreciate that we did start to move things for Ledgelight Health District. But also, I agree that we should also maybe have an emergency possibly category or something here where we're looking to kind of maybe advance certain sections maybe a little bit faster than this module or this grid. I can appreciate the fact that there are no dates on here, as was stated, because you feel that this is just an overview. But for me to approve this in its entirety, it would be helpful to have ballpark ideas, because my approval of each of these steps, I'm just hoping that the range of time between them is not a large gap. So, and if that was the case, then I might say we might want to merge this step and shorten that step. So, but I think it's a great starting point and platform, but I just think it's really important to really know the time span, because that's very critical to this, and being able to approve it in its entirety. But I think it's a good first point.
If-
But having a block for emergency funds in a separate category, whatever we
Just
determine as in high needs, might have a different track, is what I'm trying to say.
And that's what Mr. Bronk was addressing. We talked about this a couple months ago, and we've already begun that. So yes, thank you. I just wanted to note that Chairperson Watson has joined us as well. Thank you for joining us, Chairperson Watson.
So my question to that was, what is the track for emergency funds then?
I think you should look to the example of the Ledge Light funding that just ran through council and RTM.
Right, but I'm thinking, is there going to be another grid used if others need to utilize that?
I think it's going to be the exact same way. If Mr. Burt and Director Landry feel otherwise, then please speak up, but it went through council. It went through RTM approval as an emergency.
Now,
If it's not an emergency, then it'll go through this lengthier process with the grant applications. Mr. Burt?
just thinking, as we do some of these preliminary ones, as we brought in the outside agencies, and we want to fast track some of that, get some of these groups together and, speak with them. That'll probably give us the idea of where the actual emergencies are. As of this point, we've addressed the 2 emergencies. Now, someone like Human Services Marge may end up having some things she comes across. I could see having a pot for things like that, but that we have to figure out a little more too. No money can be released even to legislator COG till though we get some of these details figured out on tracking. But I think soon we'll have a better idea on emergency funds needed, but I don't know if we're quite there yet.
Okay. All
But I do, it's a priority though.
Okay, and so at that point, then you would propose what the track would be?
Yes, and then
Thank
we probably put away a certain amount, because something like Human Services, you might not know exactly what amount, but agree to whatever it is, 50,000 or whatever that you end up with, and for any other pots like that.
Thank you.
Okay, so Chairperson Watson, we are looking at the process that Ms. Harkin and Mr. Bronk have come up with as far as allocating funds, and it's displayed on screen right now, and we're just trying to come to consensus as to whether this is the process we want to go forward with. So feel free, if you have any questions or comments, to raise your hand and jump into the discussion. Does anyone else have any comments on this or concerns? Let's go concerns. Councilor Aubry?
I don't know why that went on, but since it did, I think that the most important thing is reaching out to the public, and that's at the top, and that's going to set a lot of our strategy. This is an excellent flow chart. I think we can follow it, but until we really have our needs assessment out there, phase 1 and phase 2, we're not really going to know what the community wants. So I think expediting those would be excellent, and I think the other things will be expedited as well. So I think this is great. It's put it in my mind the right way, and I think it will with other people. So thank you, Tabitha.
And I think
That's
And I think really the critical thing right now is just the public outreach, because this is what we're thinking for the flow, but certainly as we get outreach, things could, alter a bit.
Right. All right, anyone? Oh, okay, Chairperson Watson, you have the floor.
I apologize if this has been discussed, and so someone can just do an offline conversation with me if you want to. But the needs assessment, are we doing a specific survey to get input? I know that you brought in outside agencies to come in and kind of talk about that, or some, but I am just wondering, are we doing a survey around that? And is there a survey that is being utilized by other districts, other towns, other regions that have gotten that pot of money that we could just also use, so that we're not reinventing the wheel?
I'll take that one. So yeah, yes, we are going to be doing a survey. We're actually doing even kind of more than a survey, because we're using this Bang the Table platform, which is very participatory website kind of thing where it's a community, and there's all sorts of ways to there's participatory budgeting, where people can kind of put money towards things that they think are important. So we can list some examples and then also have open-ended questions. So we do see it that way. And also, I just wanted to say that, phase 1 and 2 are very much a virtual engagement program. Because of COVID, we can't really have live in-person public meetings, which we wanted to have. We wanted to have something where we have sticky notes and dots and have people really engaging in things. So what Bang the Table does is it brings that online, that kind of participatory, thought-provoking, engaging action. So we hope to see that go quickly, because it's all online and can be downloaded really easily.
Does that answer your question, Chairman Watson?
Sorry. It does and it doesn't. But I am just actually wondering, what are we doing for families that don't have necessarily web access, or that can do that on devices that are too small? And because my concern is that how are we reaching, our members of the community that don't have technology savvy, or they don't have access to that type of technology that would allow us to do that. I do understand that we're in a pandemic, and I do understand that currently with the surge, it will be difficult. And I'm not coming here with saying this is an answer. I'm just saying, I'm wondering how we are thinking about reaching those members of our community that may not have access.
And I want to add one thing before you answer, because it kind of relates to this. Is the platform you're talking about, is it in any way limited by numbers of participants, or is it unlimited? So we could get all the RTM, all the council, all the Board of Ed, and a big chunk of the public in, or is it limited in any way?
It's not limited in any way. It's really interesting to see it in action. And I think it'd be great if we could follow up sometime and see an example of it. I could send in a couple, actually, I could send some links out to the committee, and they could see examples of it in action. But to answer your question about participation and the digital divide, as they call it, we have really talked about this a lot, and we are hoping to do things like a kiosk at the senior center or a kiosk at the community center. We've talked about, flyering, traditional forms of getting information out to smaller targeted groups. But it's also very true that the digital divide is not as much of an issue these days. Everyone has a phone. And what we did when we reviewed these vendors was to see how these things display on a phone and make sure that it was really simple. Maybe the survey is only 2 questions and the buttons are really big. So we're hoping that we've overcome those things, but it's a process, and any suggestions are welcome.
Thank you, Tabitha. That's great.
Seeing if anyone else has anything else that they would like to add. Any first-time speakers? Councilor Bordelon, you have the floor. Oh, Representative Conley.
Thank
Councilor
you.
Bordelon, would you yield to Representative Conley?
No, I don't mind.
Thank you. Representative Conley.
Don't worry, I'll be very quick. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Watson for bringing up the digital divide, and just echo her comments that there are many folks, seniors, folks with children who don't have the same access. That's those of us who are currently on Zoom clearly have figured it out by now. But as we've seen in the state, there are a lot of folks who just don't have the access. So I encourage the kiosks to have documentation so people can make sure everyone's heard appropriately. So not documentation, like advertisement, so that folks know where to go. If the library happens, to be not available due to COVID, or if the town hall has limited hours due to COVID, directing people where they can have access to have their opinion shared. Because it's so important that we have public input with this money.
The school systems, maybe we can talk to the superintendents to make sure that they have that information as well.
That's what I was going to ask, if they could team with Board of Ed or the superintendent to try to do some outreach, maybe at parents' night, or I'm not sure what your formats would be, but any extra help in reaching people would be appreciated. The synergy is great. Counselor Bordelon?
Yeah, thank you. Also, it's just really important at minimum, at least dual language, making sure that this survey meets those needs. I say minimum dual language. I wish it was available for anyone that can click whatever their preference is, which some applications and things are moving towards. But I think it's important that the applications are also in dual language as well as the survey. Also, all these directions and deadlines, as well as a lot of folks who speak English, reading and comprehension sometimes comes second. So needing maybe help filling out these forms, in its entirety, because it can be kind of complex. So the understanding and knowledge and support, and even for people who do speak English, sometimes there's comprehension or other disabilities that present, and I just don't want certain sections of town or folks to be under serviced or not met or reach. So those are things that are really important to me. It's just making sure we look outside the box completely and approach it in a way to hit all of the communities. Thank you.
Any other first-time speakers?
I was just going to mention, if I can, I like the kiosk idea. I'd like to see the library definitely at some point.
I have one more process question for you, and perhaps I'm just not interpreting it correctly, but will the labeling of the buckets be done prior to the public outreach, or will the labeling of the buckets be a product of the public outreach?
Well, I think we've talked, I don't think, we have talked about having kind of 2 layers of outreach there. So we'd have an initial, very open-ended, what are your blue sky ideas? And then we filter things into buckets with this committee as well. And then go back out to the public and say, these are the major categories, or major projects. Out of these, what do you think? Because this platform is it's so easy to do that. I think the more rounds of questions, it kind of freshens things up anyway.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Burke, go ahead.
Just to mention, on that first round, though, the first phase, we will put some basic information about what the grants are eligible for, what the intent is, so that they have some guidance, but trying to make it so they don't get blocked in, and we want people thinking out of the box.
So no leading questions then, is what you're saying. Give them the parameters, but don't lead them.
Okay.
All right, Moderator Eben.
Thank you. I don't know if we're going to be going through the grant part of that Tabitha put together, but that's exactly what should go into that grant application, which seems to be missing, is that when you develop those criteria that you're going to have, that you're going to use in your review, which are going to be, I think, based on the buckets that you develop, right? You're going to, whatever it is, does it fit this? And then you're going to have some metric that says how well does it fit that need, or that should go right into your grant application, because what you want your reviewers to do is to be able to not have to search for the criteria that you're using for reviewing. It should be up to the applicant to tell you all these things. So there should be your metric. It's kind of an iterative process, but those metrics, that these bins are really need to be in the grant application. And so when you think about developing the grant application, you really have to already have kind of figured out how you're going to review it, because you want all that information in your application. Anyway, just a thought on how to amend that a little to make it easier at the end part of it, the selection. Sorry. I don't mean to be too in the weedsy.
I think I'm seeing some of that, but although I've only written one grant in my lifetime, so, but I think I'm seeing some of that in the application. So we'll go there next. It's already quarter after, but what I wanted to do was, it seems like we're pretty much in consensus that this is a good process and we'd like staff to move ahead with it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. Mr. Byrd, is that all you need from us, right? Because we're not a voting body, so it's the consensus of the Long-Term Recovery Committee that the flow chart on page 15 is an appropriate way to proceed at this point with the noted recommendations that we have here. Okay, so then Ms. Harkin, if you'd like to go into the application now, please. And this, I think, starts on page 7, if I'm correct. And would you want to go back to screen sharing again, or?
Yeah, I'm just going to pull it up and then I'll screen
Great.
share again.
So this is all off of the first item on the agenda. I think it's the only item on the agenda. And this started on page 7.
Okay.
There we go. I'm going to mute.
So I really appreciated Moderator Emmons' comments about getting the criteria into the application, and I'd like to think about that a little bit more and talk to her about that too. So this is a several page application. It's modeled after several different municipalities that I looked at for examples of grant applications of this type. Not ARPA necessarily, but community development types of grants. So basic project information, and it starts with a one sentence, whoops, I'm sorry. What I do? Hold on just a minute, sorry.
Just to mention, we're not looking for any kind of approval for the grant application. We're just kind of showing you where we're at this point. It's still a work in progress.
Yes, and it says draft all over it, definitely. So one to sentence description of the project, just to give the people of the review committee a quick glance. What category does the project fall under? And this is from the interim final rule. The categories up to respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. And then the other category being to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband. And then it goes down to applicant information. So you have a town department, a nonprofit, private group or citizen or other, their tax ID number so we can look them up, a co-applicant if, for example, they are working on a project together, a budget summary, so the total request and their funding request, and then later on, oh, my formatting was off on here. Later on, there's a little bit more information on a budget summary. Then the submission checklist and instructions, just to go over what we're looking for. All the little check boxes aren't showing, but it has, the application, the signed funding agreement, a project schedule, a project budget, a certificate of good standing, nonprofit IRS certification. So these are all, required documents to make sure that we're in federal compliance. And then just an outline of what the funds are, the timeline and reporting for those funds. If people want to look up more information about, oh, I didn't realize my formatting was so weird on this. They can look up the website, and then there's the application instructions to fill out the pages. So then we would insert a funding agreement, which Cindy Landry and I have been discussing to have very clear information about reporting requirements, for example, because we do have to be in federal compliance and there are reporting standards. It's a thick document, so that we have to do that with everyone. So there's a placeholder for that. So then it gets into the questions. We have the project narrative, the general narrative of what the project is, the scope of the project, the community need. So this gets to the COVID-19 recovery. Is it related to COVID-19? So, who's it serving? How does the project benefit the public? And I think that gets to criteria a little bit. How does the project preserve and enhance the character of the town? How does the project address the recovery in response to federal guidance? Specifically the final rule. Then there's a question about how will the success of the project be measured, describing the outcomes and deliverables. So that's what we're going to need to be looking for in the reporting. Critical need. So this is where we would find out if it's an emergency project, like Councilor Bordelon was talking about earlier. We would have that in the application so we could define if it's an emergency project. Applicant information. So this is describing the applicant. So if they're a public, a private, nonprofit, an individual, a partnership, etc. So what's the history and background, so that we can get to know, for example, if it's a small business, what kind of business is it, and how long have you been in business? So if it makes sense to give them a grant. Project feasibility. So listing and explaining further actions or steps required. And then it gets into final information, financial information. So describing other attempts to secure funding and or other grants that the applicant has currently or has applied for, because sometimes it's conflicting. If you have another federal grant and you're receiving money for that, you can't receive more money. So we need to make sure that we understand that. I'm just skimming through this quickly. And then the schedule and budget. So, what's the basic project schedule? What's the 50% completion? And what does that look like? And that's good for us to be able to follow up, at those milestones. We can call them and say, how's things going? And then the funding sources, if they are, and they might not use one or two of these columns, but what are the funding sources and what's part of their projects? And then finally, did you receive CARES Act funding or other federal grants? And that also gets to if they've received other grants. And I think that's it. So, questions?
Very good. Mr. Bronk?
I wanted to touch on the last, number 10, that last item. There has been significant funding that's been allocated over the past several months, and it comes from many sources. We've got PPP money, EIDL, state bridge loan monies. Some of that is forgivable loans, some of it is not. And I think there have been other local sources as well. One concern that we have is that someone has received funding or is in process of securing other funding, and possibly they're double dipping, triple dipping, or even worse. Been a lot of articles recently regarding funding that has been inappropriately and illegally allocated to individuals and entities. So I don't know that we're going to be able to positively ensure that we have our fingers on all funds, but this is our way to actually try to reach out and get the first sense of whether or not they have received funding, so that we're not allocating funding for the same item or the same project that they've already received funding for. That's a really important point that I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you. Mr. Burt, did you want to add anything before we open it up for questions or comments?
No, I don't have anything.
Anyone have comments or concerns? It looks like a good start, and I'm sure Moderator Eben would be willing to assist with those criteria and putting them in. Is anyone seeing anything else right off the bat that they wanted to chime in on? Councilor Bordelon.
Thank you. I think it is under number 10. I know that Paige just spoke about like if they've applied. So what type of proof of application? What would you, just them listing yes, or how would you seek to know?
Well,
The way it's written is that we would just have them listed. So,
Mm.
Paige, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna say, this is our first attempt, I suppose, to work with the honor system to some degree. We're asking them as a part of their request, have you received other funding? I actually would like to expand it beyond federal funding. I'd like to include state, local, nonprofit, and other. Mainly, if someone's doing a project and they are receiving funding in other ways, we need to know about it so that we're not providing funding to something that they've already secured or are likely to secure.
So I just wanted to understand, make sure I was understanding correctly. So a same agency can apply for funding, but for different projects, just obviously not for the same project. So maybe a question that states, have you received any funding for this current project that you're requesting? And sometimes a hard yes or no, and then if so, please explain and list those projects. That hard yes or no gives you a nice hard stop. And then if they have applied for other things, it can be listed, but it's not pertaining to that particular project. So that's just one thing I, just from forms I've dealt with, yes or no, have you applied for anything for this particular project, and kind of be a little bit more targeted on the question. Might be helpful, just a suggestion. And I think that was my one thing. And then at what point will we be talking about who's sitting to review these applications? Who's going to be on the review boards for these? Is that going to be another discussion another day, or?
Yeah, we have a little while till we have a lot of topics we have to get through. There's a lot more to this, I think, than any of us realized initially.
Yeah, so there will be a review board for
Oh,
different. Okay.
Yeah,
And
and
that's-
ultimately the council will have to, this group, I think, will recommend that what the format would be to the council, and the council would have to vote whether that's the format they want to use, or the group they want to use.
Okay. Yeah, I think the application looks great. I just think a little bit more targeted on the question, and then they can list. So thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Burr, was there something else you wanted to say? If not, I'll go on to other speakers. I saw
No,
you.
it got covered.
Okay, great. Moderator Evan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I can certainly speak with Tabitha offline on this, but following up on what Councilor Bordelon was saying, I think you can also look at things like leveraged funding. So maybe not double dipping, but what are they bringing to it? Are there other funds that they're using to make the project even bigger, which is a positive thing, not necessarily a fraudulent thing that can be envisioned. So, and I would, it's very common to ask for current and pending grants, so have you received this, or have you applied for any other funding? Please list, these applications that are active now, what do you, or something like that, so you can know that they're not double dipping, and you have them kind of list those all there. But there's other things like you can ask for not only the deliverables, which I think I saw there, but what are the broader impacts envisioned of the project? And then you can get into things like maybe environmental quality or environmental justice or CIP needs. And so there can be, impacts beyond maybe the initial bin that might be generated by that project. I would also, instead of just having like kind of a what bin or what category are you submitting this in, I would encourage you to have a much larger space for the applicant to relate what the relevance of that application is to the bin that they're submitting within, or the bucket, whatever we're calling it, the category. And that in itself could be a category, is how relevant is it to these categories we've created. I think you want a lot more than just the few words that would fit in that. And kind of speaking to that, I would encourage you at the beginning to set parameters on the grants in terms of page length, font, things that when you have students, you want them to write more, but sometimes when you have applicants, you want them to write less. So you would probably constrain it. I would take it out of these boxes. And I don't know if you're thinking of an online submission portal, or if these people are going to submit as a PDF.
A fillable PDF, yeah.
Yeah, but so you probably want to make it so it's less binned in terms of the size. So they may have more that goes here, less that goes here. They may want to add references, but I would suggest limiting the total length of the package that they're, or at least maybe the narrative, some parts of it, so that you don't get like huge things. But I'm happy to chat offline, and I don't want to dominate this. Looks great.
I'll give you a call.
I have just two questions. So the application will have town departments applying through this as well. The schools, if there is going to be, let's say there was a joint project between the town and the school's money itself is not going through this process, correct? Okay, great. So then if it is going to be something joint, or if it's going to be a CIP that we would be doing, we being the town would be doing, that is on a school property, it would go through this process though. Yes?
Yes.
For
I
our
believe
portion of the money, yes.
Okay. Second question, and maybe this is very naive of me. Is this only open to Groton residents or businesses that are headquartered in Groton? But is that a criteria, or how does that work?
We have to have some more discussion, I think, on that, because I could see like homeless hospitality center, they'd likely, apply to multiple places. Now, the other thing is there might be some place that puts an app in their end here for a project, hoping to get one or the other. Well, if we see they apply to the other place, I think there should be some discussion of, hey, can we team up and each put half in to accomplish this?
Okay, good.
Things to
So
think
then,
about.
all right, great. So yeah, so we have certain relatively small businesses, small scale operations of very large worldwide businesses located in town. So then we'll have to figure out if we're going to have them be able to apply, and just what you said. Thank you, Mr. Burt, for.
I definitely think they have to provide a benefit to the town, and that,
So that'll be part of the rephrasing the questions and narrowing that down. Mr. Bronk?
Just to emphasize what Mr. Byrd had just said, there has to be a direct benefit to the town. The first thought I thought of was one of the explicit allowances is to provide for tourism. And Mystic is clearly a hub of tourist activity, and the Mystic Chamber of Commerce splits both Groton and Stonington. So in that type of example, it wouldn't have to be exclusive to Groton alone. There would just have to be some direct benefit to Groton.
Thank you. So that'll be spelled out very clearly then. Representative Conley, did you want to chime in as to what I was saying?
Yes, as you were talking about spelling out, I think reiterating what Moderator Evans said about metrics at the front, make sure that's in the notes so that folks know how to craft applications to receive funding. And then the folks who will then be reading and evaluating the applications will get a more concise package, hopefully meeting their goals, and everyone knows what the goals are. Also, if folks who will be thinking, probably folks who will be on the team, maybe counselors or volunteers, to make sure that training is included for them, because there are some, certainly with grant applications, a lot of conflict issues. And sometimes if one has not been through that process before in their work, we all don't do what Moderator Eben does every day, may need to make sure that everyone has the knowledge so they don't have an ethical misstep.
Thank you. Councilor Bordelon.
Yes, so just looking at the application, I was just reviewing some stuff online. If an agency or nonprofit was in the process applying for funds, it doesn't mean that they're going to be approved. So could one then, I mean, obviously they're trying to get funding, so they're not double dipping necessarily, but if there's deadlines and hard stops on applications, it would make sense that one might apply for multiple grants or applications for funding because they're trying to get funding. So how would we handle that in this application process? If I was the person who did apply, yes, I check yes, I have not received, I'm at the deadline, would I write the deadline when I would know by, but I'm trying to meet your deadline because maybe I will be denied by them, but approved by you guys?
I think we're going to have to go back and look at that section again. We're all agreeing here. I think we need the appropriate language that simply allows the town to understand the intent as to whether or not someone will be seeking funding. If they already have received funding, we're going to have to, I think, try to capture that best at that particular moment. But we're all talking about the same thing. Certainly, people should be seeking as much funding as they can when they're in need. But we also want to know what their intent is so that we can appropriately try to evaluate and track and score in relation to other projects.
Right. I think that's a great answer. And I think it would be appropriate just so that people don't feel discouraged because they're in the application process, but it just has not been approved yet and they may be denied. And this application may be one that they can get. So I think that's great. Thank you.
So I just got an alert on my phone. We're in a tornado watch, guys, so be careful. Moderator Evan?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Should I run out? That's a little scary. I just wanted to say to Councilor Bordelon that that's what the current impending list would refer to. So you'd ask people to say, what is your current funding? You know, what are the pending grants that you've submitted? And because we're so jointly as a town connected with the city of Groton, you might just have a single, like a yes, no, you know, like a checkbox that says, have you submitted one of these to the city of Groton? Because it would probably make sense to at some level to link the city and the town reviews, because it's, you know, to some extent, this, you know, there's going to be overlap on the stakeholders that are impacted or the audience that's being impacted. So I would suggest that at the very least, there'd be some real explicit question about that. And the rest you would kind of just allow the applicant to fill in.
Thank you. Okay, very good. Mr. Byrd, is there anything else, any kind of consensus further consensus that you need from this body before we move on?
No, not tonight.
All right, great. Thank you very much. So that's everything on the agenda for this evening. When do you need us back for another meeting? We could check our calendars and.
Let me pull up my calendar.
All right. It is the first Wednesday of the month. We have, when is RTM? Is it the 8th or the 15th, Moderator Evan?
The
It's
8th.
second Wednesday is the 8th.
I think it's the 8th because that's the second one.
Now, if we want to do this in a timely manner, I think for a little while, we should try for every couple of weeks or, 2 meetings a month if people are open to that.
All right. What day do you have available? Do you have the 15th available, Mr. Burt?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So then we'll say the 15th at 5:30. All right, great. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Would someone like, okay, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to, no, second. I think someone seconded it, but I'll second it again.
No one
Yeah.
moved it, so. All right.
I'll move it.
Great. We'll have Evan
Second.
moved it, Bordelon seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So moved unanimously. We're adjourned at 6:35 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your time. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good night.
Guys. Good night.
Bye.